They built roads that still exist. They shaped laws that still guide us. But on the battlefield, the Romans were something else entirely. More than warriors, they were thinkers, masters of strategy. And sometimes their tactics were so ruthless, so unexpected, that they didn't just win battles, they crushed the spirit of their enemies. This was an army built on discipline, fear, and precision, an unstoppable machine that didn't just fight harder, but smarter. Their enemies never saw it coming, and when they did, it was already too late. Today we uncover the secrets behind the Roman army's craziest battle tactics, the ones that truly shocked the ancient world. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you never miss the stories like this. One of the most shocking tactics of the Roman army, which actually worked, was something that looked more like a strange machine than a group of men. It was called the testudo. The name means tortoise in Latin, and once you saw it in action, the name made perfect sense. Imagine this: rows of soldiers marching slowly forward, their shields locked together so tightly that not even an arrow could slip through. Shields in the front, shields on top, shields on the sides. From a distance, it looked like a living tank made out of metal and muscle. This was no ordinary formation. This was a wall, a roof, and a shell moving as one. But why was it so terrifying? Because it was almost impossible to stop. Archers would rain down arrows, but nothing got through. Spears bounced off. Rocks were useless. Even fire couldn't reach the men beneath. The enemy would watch in horror as this wall of shields crept closer and closer, completely unstoppable. And then, when the Romans were close enough, they would break formation, pull out their swords, and attack with full force. The testudo wasn't just strong, it was smart. Roman commanders used it especially during sieges, when their men had to cross open ground under heavy fire. It protected them while they marched straight to the enemy walls. Sometimes it was even strong enough to carry horses or wagons on top of it. Can you imagine an army walking under a platform like that? That's not just defense, that's domination. But there was a catch. The testudo was slow, very slow, and if enemies got too close, the formation could be broken. The soldiers inside couldn't fight well while holding the shields in place. If cavalry charged in at the right moment, or archers attacked from both sides, it could turn into a trap. Still, most enemies had never seen anything like it. They were shocked. Some even ran before the Romans arrived. It wasn't just a tactic, it was a message. We are coming and you can't stop us. So would you have stood your ground against that living wall, or would you have run for your life? The next formation that the Romans used was something truly terrifying. A wall of warriors that didn't just fight once, but kept coming, wave after wave. This was the Roman triple line, also known as Aesia's triplex. It was one of the most brilliant and shocking battle tactics the ancient world had ever seen. The Roman army moved into position, dust rose, orders echoed across the field. Thousands of soldiers took their places, like pieces on a giant chessboard. But this was no ordinary wall of men. It stood 3 lines deep, built to wear the enemy down, slowly, surely, without mercy. At the front stood the hastati, young, strong, and ready to charge. Behind them stood the principes, older and more experienced. And in the back, the triarii, seasoned veterans, calm and silent, waiting for the right moment. 3 lines, 3 chances, 3 levels of fury. But what made this tactic so deadly? It wasn't just the strength, it was the timing. The battle didn't start with everyone charging at once. First, the velites, light soldiers, would rush forward, throw spears, shoot arrows, and then slip back through the gaps between units. Then the hastati charged. If they couldn't break the enemy, they retreated through the gaps. Still no victory? The triarii stepped in. When the triarii moved, it meant things were desperate. Romans even had a saying for that. It has come to the triarii. It meant that the situation was critical. But even then, the army didn't panic. The system was built for pressure. Soldiers swapped in and out like clockwork, never letting the enemy rest. Can you imagine standing against that? Just when you thought you'd beaten the front line, another came forward, fresh, organized and ready to kill. Then another, and maybe even another. And the best part? The formation could adapt. It worked on flat ground, in hills, and in forests. It didn't matter. The Romans always had a plan, and because of the gaps between units, they could move, retreat, and reform without chaos. It was like a machine, a human war machine. The wedge was one of the most feared formations of the Roman army. It looked like a triangle made of soldiers, narrow at the front, wide at the back. But this was not just about shape. It was a weapon in itself, a weapon made of men, shields, swords, and unstoppable force. Roman commanders used it when they needed to break through enemy lines. When the enemy stood in a solid wall, shoulder to shoulder, thinking they were safe, the Roman wedge would strike, fast, hard, and sharp. The soldiers at the very front of the wedge were the strongest and most skilled. Their job was to hit first and hit hard. Behind them, more soldiers pressed forward, row after row. The weight of the formation kept pushing. The front didn't stop. The sides spread out and widened the gap. It was just like a wooden wedge splits a log. The Roman wedge split armies. It was used in battles where breaking the enemy's line was the key to victory. At the Battle of Pindar in 168 BC, Roman wedges smashed into the famous Macedonian phalanx. The enemy line, once known as unbeatable, was torn apart. At the Battle of Watling Street, when the Romans were outnumbered by Boudicca's rebel army, the wedge helped them win. After stopping the enemy charge with volleys of spears, the Romans formed into wedges and advanced. They didn't just hold the line, they broke through it. The wedge wasn't just effective, it was shocking. Enemies didn't expect it. Most armies fought in flat, straight lines. They relied on numbers, hoping to crush their opponents with weight alone. But the wedge ignored numbers. It used precision and pressure. It didn't meet the enemy head-on. It cut them open. One moment, the enemy had a solid front. The next, it was split in half, with Romans pouring in from the center. Confusion followed. Soldiers didn't know whether to fight, flee, or try to regroup. And while they hesitated, the wedge kept moving forward. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was deadly. The Roman army had excellent tactics even in the water. One of the most surprising and shocking inventions was the corvus, a heavy wooden boat boarding bridge that turned ships into battlegrounds. The word corvus means crow or raven in Latin, and the name came from the sharp iron spike at the tip of the bridge, shaped like a bird's beak. But this was no decoration. It was designed to bite deep into enemy ships and hold them in place. In the early days of the First Punic War, Rome had almost no experience at sea. Carthage, on the other hand, had a powerful navy and fast, well-trained crews. Rome had to find a way to fight on the water without relying on sailing skills. Their answer? Turned sea battles into land battles. The corvus was about 11 meters long and just over a meter wide. It was mounted on the front of the ship and controlled by ropes and pulleys. When an enemy ship came close, the Romans dropped the bridge. The sharp spike slammed into the enemy deck, locking the two ships together. Then Roman soldiers, trained for land combat, ran across the bridge and began fighting hand to hand. Carthaginian sailors didn't expect this. They were masters of sea movement and speed, not close combat. Suddenly their biggest strength, mobility, was useless. Once the corvus was in place, the Roman legions treated the enemy ship like a battlefield. At the Battle of Mylae in 260 BC, the corvus helped Rome win its first major naval victory. 30 Carthaginian ships were captured. The crews had no way to escape the brutal Roman attacks. At the Battle of Ecnomus in 256 BC, the tactic worked again. Despite Carthage's superior speed and maneuvering, they lost over 90 ships. Roman soldiers used the corvus to board, fight, and dominate. The enemy was shocked. A naval war was supposed to be about speed, wind, and ships, but the Romans changed the rules. They brought swords, shields, and discipline onto the sea. Still, the corvus had flaws. It was heavy. It couldn't be used in rough seas, and over time, as Roman sailors became better trained, it became less necessary. But for a short time, this strange, brutal bridge gave Rome control of the waves and turned fear into victory. Feigned retreat is a classic among battle tactics, but the Romans and their enemies learned just how dangerous it could be. At first glance, it looks like a loss. Soldiers turn and run, the enemy cheers and chases, but it's all part of the plan. In a feigned retreat, a force pretends to break and flee. The goal was to draw the enemy forward, making them overconfident and disorganized. And then, when the time is right, the retreating force stops, turns, and strikes back. This tactic doesn't just take courage, it takes discipline. Soldiers have to pretend to lose without actually losing control. When done right, it's devastating. The Romans first experienced this in 262 BC during the First Punic War near the city of Agrigentum in Sicily. The Carthaginian general, Hanno, ordered his Numidian cavalry to engage the Romans, then quickly fall back as if they were defeated. The Romans believed the trick. Their cavalry chased after the retreating horsemen, fast and eager to finish them. But what they didn't know is they were heading straight into a trap. Hanno's main army was waiting. The Roman cavalry was ambushed and suffered heavy losses. The shock wasn't just in the defeat, it was in the deception. Another brutal example happened far from Rome in 221 BC. The Greek commander, Xenoetus, fighting for the Seleucid king Antiochus III, marched against the rebel Molon in Media. Molon pulled back, pretending to retreat. Xenoetus crossed the river thinking victory was near, but his army became relaxed, many even drinking and resting. Then Molon's troops returned, fast and deadly. Xenoetus was killed and his whole army was wiped out. Even Rome's enemies used the tactic well. The Lusitanians in Hispania were experts. In 153 BC, their leader, Caesarus, used a false retreat to crush a Roman army under Lucius Mummius. Later, the famous Lusitanian commander Varathus would use the same move to outsmart Roman generals again and again. So why did this tactic shock the enemy? Let's say because it played with their minds. It made them believe they were winning right before they walked into disaster. It turned pride into panic and strength into confusion. Romans, under the command of Julius Caesar for a time, pulled off one of the most shocking and ambitious siege tactics in ancient history. It happened in 52 BC. At a place called Alesia, the Gallic leader, Vercingetorix, had taken refuge inside the fortified hilltop town with thousands of warriors. Most generals would have tried to storm the place, but not Caesar. Instead of a direct attack, Caesar chose patience and engineering. First, he ordered his legions to surround Alesia completely. He wanted no one to get out and no help to get in. To make that happen, he built a massive line of fortifications. This was called a circumvallation. It stretched for 16 kilometers. That's 10 miles of ditches, wooden walls, towers and traps completely circling the enemy. 23 towers stood along the line, packed with Roman archers and slingers ready to strike if the Gauls tried to escape. But Caesar didn't stop there. He knew Vercingetorix had sent riders out to call for reinforcements, so Caesar built another line of fortifications facing the other way. The second ring was called a contravallation. It was meant to protect the Roman army from being attacked from the outside. In short, Caesar trapped his enemy between two deadly walls like a lid on a boiling pot. The detail was incredible. Caesar's men dug deep trenches, some filled with water to stop cavalry. Others were packed with sharpened stakes. Behind them stood high walls topped with battlements and wooden spikes. There were even hidden pits and traps placed in front of the lines to slow down charging enemies. And when the terrain wasn't flat, Caesar came up with something even more surprising. He ordered the construction of a huge earthen ramp. Its purpose was to build a deep depression in the land and allow siege towers to roll forward. No escape from inside, no rescue from the outside. Vercingetorix was waiting for his allies to break through, but when they came, they found themselves blocked by the outer wall. The Gauls inside tried to break out. The ones outside tried to break in. Both failed. The double siege worked. The strategy stunned Rome's enemies. Who builds two walls to fight one battle? Caesar did, and with it he broke the last strong resistance in Gaul. Some states often used war elephants in battles. The Romans were not one of them, but they had excellent tactics in battles against them, tactics that turned fear into strategy. War elephants were terrifying. They were fast, huge and unstoppable at first glance. Their thick skin made them hard to kill, and their strength allowed them to crush men and horses alike. In the Pyrrhic Wars and Punic Wars, Roman soldiers saw them up close and nearly broke under their power. But Rome adapted, and once they learned how to fight them, elephants were no longer unbeatable. The first step? Don't fight them head on. Instead of attacking from the front, Roman troops aimed for the legs and eyes, weak points that were hard to defend. Spears, arrows, and side attacks became their tools. Soldiers waited for the right moment, then struck fast and moved aside. Next, they opened gaps in their formations. Rather than let the elephants crash through tightly packed lines, they created narrow passages. When the animals charged, they passed straight through without destroying the whole army, and once they were behind the main line, confused and exposed, the Romans attacked from all sides. They also used the elephants' fear against them. As powerful as they looked, elephants were still animals, and animals can panic. One of the strangest tactics the Romans used involved fire pigs. Yes, actual pigs covered in flammable pitch or tar, then set on fire and released towards the charging elephant. The sound of the pigs squealing in terror, combined with the sight and smell of flames, was enough to drive the elephants mad with fear. In their panic, they often turned around and ran straight back into their own lines, trampling soldiers and causing chaos. It was a brutal, horrifying trick, but it worked. To stop charges before they started, the Romans dug trenches and placed sharp spikes in the ground. These obstacles blocked the elephants or injured them before they could do any damage. 2 battles proved that these tactics worked. At the Battle of Benvenuto
in 275 BC,
the Romans defeated Pyrrhus of Epirus using open passages and side attacks. Pyrrhus had won, but lost so much that he said, "One more victory like this, and I'm finished." At the Battle of Zama
in 202 BC,
the Romans under Scipio left gaps in their lines. Hannibal's elephants charged, missed their targets, and ran back into the Carthaginian army. That chaos helped Rome win and end the Second Punic War. Roman enemies were truly shocked by how much control the Roman commanders had over their own soldiers. It wasn't just about weapons or formations, it was about discipline. And one of the harshest, most terrifying tactics the Romans used to keep their legions in line was called decimation. Decimation meant killing 1 out of every 10 soldiers in a unit chosen by lot. It didn't matter if a man had fought bravely or not. If luck turned against him, he died. And not by an officer's sword, but by the hands of his 9 closest comrades. They were forced to kill him themselves. The punishment was used in extreme cases: mutiny, desertion, or cowardice. Roman generals knew that fear could be a powerful weapon. If one man fled in battle, it could spread panic, so they made sure that no one would dare. The price was too high. The process was brutal. The unit was divided into groups of 10. Each group drew lots. The unlucky one was then clubbed or stabbed to death by the other 9. After that, the survivors were punished further, reduced rations, sometimes only barley instead of wheat, and sleeping outside the safety of the camp. Their shame was complete, but so was the message. This tactic wasn't used often, but when it was, it sent a wave of fear through the ranks and through enemy armies. Roman soldiers might have feared death in battle, but they feared failure even more. They knew that their greatest danger might come from their own side if they broke ranks or disobeyed orders. One of the most famous examples was during the Third Servile War. When Roman general Crassus failed to defeat Spartacus, he blamed his own soldiers. To teach them a lesson, he ordered a decimation. Hundreds were killed, not by the enemy, but by their own brothers in arms. Mark Antony used it too. After a disastrous defeat in Media, his soldiers had lost their courage, so he punished them the Roman way. And long before them, even early Republic generals like Appius Claudius had used the same tactic to force discipline during the Volscian Wars. Enemies who heard about it couldn't believe it. Soldiers killing each other by order? But that was what made Rome so powerful. It showed how far they were willing to go for order, control, and loyalty. Which of these Roman tactics do you find the most shocking? The Roman army mastered war not just with strength, but with strategy, and often with terrifying creativity. Have you heard of any other military tactics that push the limits like these? Share your thoughts below, and let's keep exploring the genius and brutality behind the armies that shaped history. See you in the next one.